Thank you for showing up. I think it's a very, let's say, VIP crowd that we have here, which is great. It's exclusive. It fits to the topic, the exclusion zone of Chernobyl. Today we'd like to present to you the final results of the workshop of last week that we called Happy, Healthy Chernobyl. My name is Peter Veenstra. I'm landscape architect and partner of Lola Landscape Architects in Rotterdam. This is Julian Restrepo, architect from Thaler Architects, Bogota, Colombia. And there's Jason Hilberford, urbanist from LCC in Hong Kong. And together we've been collaborating for over 5 years doing projects, and we decided to not only pursue, let's say, design competitions, but also try to develop content together. And one of the things, let's say, that unites us is that we want to make a difference as architects, as designers, and we see it as a very positive thing that more and more designers engage with world's problems. One of the first things we did was mapping out some of these problems. I think one of the biggest challenges we have now is to find a new way of living on this planet, sustainable way, and this is not only looking at the future but also looking at the past, because we left quite some scars on the earth. This is what we call the map of lost landscapes, with all the disasters that took place, and of which at least 99% you've never heard of. And all these places are sort of left behind, unusable. You can see here like lost cities, ghost towns, no-go zones, brown fields, toxic time bombs like red rivers, flooded places that are completely unusable, disease quarantine areas, atomic deserts, even radiation hotspots, and you can see it's sort of almost like a map of future challenges for us as designers. What we like about this is that what we see is that somehow this engagement of designers, we feel also has a form of pragmatism. Many of the designers tend to follow the news, let's say, and I think the best examples are the hurricanes that we had in the last years, like Sandy and Katrina in the States. That really had a sort of a trail of architects and urbanists that were trying to do projects and get work to help solving, let's say, the restoration or the reconstruction of those areas. It's a form, you could see it as a form of ambulance chasing, and it's these are sort of 3 shots from web pages. This is an interview with a Dutch guy, which makes me feel a bit ashamed. That really brought the slogan, "Let's bring in the Dutch," when it was about flooding in the States, where he really tried to brand Dutch designers as guys that know how to deal with water and the guys you should hire to solve your problem. We think it's interesting to not only look at these sort of headline disasters, let's say, that fill the newspapers every day, but look at these forgotten disasters, or disasters that took place a long time ago or are taking place at such a slow speed that people don't perceive it as a disaster. I think there are really a lot of interesting challenges that we could pick up and help to solve. That's where we got to Chernobyl, because we said basically Chernobyl is the mother of all lost landscapes. And our hope was that to, of course, engage with the site and see if we can help contributing to it, but also see if we can sort of learn from it on how to deal with other post-disaster areas in the world. So the presentation of today will be us three. The idea was to do a sort of more informal way of presenting, but also all the participants of the group. So it's quite I think, abundant, lively presentation. First, we'll talk about sort of short analysis, initial ideas of the workshop. Then we focused on 3 scenarios. We went on the site visit to the exclusion zone, which kind of changed our perception on the whole topic. And then we decided to actually change the whole ideas of the 3 scenarios and work on one concept, which is basically consisting of a framework within multiple projects could take place, and then we'll close off with a sort of the practical next steps after this workshop. Does someone want to take over, or shall I just continue?
You keep going and we'll jump in.
Yeah?
You're doing great.
First of all, as a preparation for the workshop, we worked on a book with analysis on the zone, the pollution, but also the economics of it, sort of the safety of the area, then also analyzing the tourism that takes place, and ambitions for the site.
I think the idea was, I mean, when we say we hired someone locally based we knew from other places to do this kind of research from us, and with her help, you know, we wanted to have some base understandings of what we were going into even before we arrived, so we could do some research before we even arrived here in Kiev. We've been here before, but we wanted to understand some of the background. Simple things just like the current legislation, both historic and what's going on. Because as you can see, it's quite small, but let's say it's, from what we understand, within the next 6 months, the policy of how the land is managed and who has the right to develop within the exclusion zone is potentially going to shift. So this made our notion of engaging with the topic feel much more fresh and important, but also just to start to understand, even before being here, the notions of how the pollution works, how it's been measured, how it's being shared with the public. And then, as Pedro was mentioning, you know, we need to be aware of the larger region in terms of economic realities, land development, and these sort of issues to give us, again, some background through a series of interviews that were done with some experts and politicians. And then, what does this mean? And as you can see, some of the ambitions that start to emerge on the site, because as the potential usage of Chernobyl shifts of the region, people with different parties, with different interests start to have ideas about what could happen. And so we wanted to be aware of this before we kind of dove into the reality of the site. But that gave us, let's say, quite a very abstract, a very numbers-based, a very policy-based sort of background, but to kind of set us up before you deal with the reality that comes with the implication of a site like this and what happened on that site.
And after we looked at the numbers and these abstract ideas, then we found out and we knew it was more about the people and what happened. And we here have compiled some data and some images that I think are experiences that you have seen earlier, but that struck us as foreigners a lot. 500,000 people working alongside the authorities to try to contain the damage. So when we start understanding the human impact this thing had in a lot of people, we went to the Chernobyl Museum watched videos, learned about this tragedy. And it was not only these liquidators, these people trying to contain the damage, it also affected a lot more people. I think from our research, we understood that we will never understand exactly the amount of victims this thing actually had, but we found some data that shows that it can be between 4,000 and 60,000 direct victims. It's something very hard to calculate, but we understood that it's a tragedy of immense magnitude, and that it extends beyond the liquidators and affected regular people, children, and their parents, and a lot of generations after that.
I think what's key about that, I would add, is as we go through what we'll be talking about, is because of what happened on the site and the human disaster, there's been legislation and other things that have come in that have kind of separated the reality of Chernobyl from the human reality and what it means to the people of the region or even the people of the world. It's kind of this, it's been separated from people being able to be engaged with the site. This exclusion zone in many ways has excluded people's desires, people's histories, the potential of what this could mean has been excluded. And I think we'll come back to that as we kind of go through, but the interest of what this could mean for people and society is I think, the underlying tone of what we're mostly interested in, of how we can rethink the potentials of the site and deliver something back to the people of the region.
But now science.
Now science, indeed. Let's say maybe the most dominant aspect of Chernobyl and the exclusion zone is its chemistry. The radiation on the site that actually was the reason to define this exclusion zone. And what we learned is that there's different kinds of radiation, and the most important radioactive materials are strontium, cesium, and trans-uranium. And they're all like invisible, we can see them in maps, but actually they have a form. So to make it slightly more tangible, we put these images up there of how these things actually look like. The radiation of these elements, these particles, form threat for human life. Let's say one of the first moments we learned in a more precise way about this is when we got a hand on this beautiful book, the Atlas of Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, in which you have beautiful detailed maps of, let's say, different levels of radiation on the site. This is very old. There has been an update after that, but we also found out that actually the current day radiation levels are not mapped in a proper way, which is crazy, we think. And of course this mapping directly gives a very, it looks very dangerous, at least the color red does. Green feels safe, but it looks very impressive, these maps. It's probably the most important for the identity also of this area. This exclusion zone also led to another very interesting thing, and that's its ecology. By excluding people, actually other animals discovered this area as a relatively comfortable place to live, and also in terms of flora, it's more and more special biotope. Here you can see a pack of wolves on the area, but there's also bisons, foxes, moose, and so on. About this exclusion zone, just first for everyone to understand exactly what it looks like and what the most important elements are. We have a 10-kilometer zone and we have a 30-kilometer zone, which are both part of the exclusion zone of which is the most famous abandoned city, and Chernobyl, just in the 30-kilometer zone, where actually right now quite some people are living and working to help to dismantle this nuclear plant. These are gates, so controlled access to the area. And all these gray dots are villages of which the majority is abandoned. The area has an enormous size. It's almost like a country on its own. It's comparable in size to Luxembourg. We actually thought it was interesting that the position of it is also slightly comparable to Luxembourg, like in between different countries. And also because it has its own ministry and its own policy, it almost feels like its own country. It also has its own economy. Let's say the whole cleaning of the site and rebuilding of it creates a lot of work, and we try to find out a bit about how much money is going on in this whole and who pays for it and who benefits. It's very hard to find that out in a very exact way. We did find some articles like this one, the New York Times article, that questions like, do disasters actually stimulate economic growth? And here are some examples of costs of different disasters. And of course these costs are going to someone. So the costs are benefit for, are profit for someone else. So there, in this economy that's going on, I think is a very important key to future change. If we manage somehow to use this economy and bend it into a more, or to widen the scope of it, we could, we think, stimulate a happy and healthy sharing. Part of that economy is, let's say, formal. The other part is informal or illegal, like what you see here, the stalkers that take tourists to explore the exclusion zone. We learned there's about 1,000 of them, which is quite a lot. They're trying to sort of give you a very adventurous experience, like sleeping in one of these abandoned houses in quite uncomfortable circumstances. And then I guess you take over. No?
So when we initially started kind of with the group getting together and kind of talking about ideas and discussing our thoughts, I mean, just a few things that came up initially. It's last year, but one key thing you start to realize is there's this lack of information, whether internationally or locally. There's a lack of transparency, whether it's about radiation, history of the site, even why the disaster happened is still a question. There's a lot of information that's not shared, and because of that, there emerges a lot of narratives or false stories or myths that also add a romanticism or a dangerous romanticism to the site, which relates to the stalkers and things like this. But it's a place that attracts people with maybe alternative ideas, some good, some maybe not so favorable. But this mythology of the site is something very special to us, and I think when we get to the other presentations, we'll discuss more of the projects, of the potential of how we think of this as a center of stories, or the idea of how information can be leveraged going forward. But another thing we wanted to talk about, I mean, the reality for myself, being here before, I'm always amazed. I mean, Chernobyl is, forgive the phrase, but an international brand. If you say Chernobyl, every single person in the world generally knows exactly what you mean, and they roughly know where it is. Obviously, that's not such a positive idea in this point in terms of how it's perceived, but for us, this was actually a potential. if Ukraine, if the region can take that known name and shift it towards something that's maybe positive, that could be something incredibly strong for the community, for the region, for even just all of Ukraine to kind of shift that, to make it a comeback story. So this is something we wanted to acknowledge, that there is a known quality.
And let me interrupt you in that sense, because Ukraine, a lot of people would be ashamed of something like this, and for obvious reasons, you know, and to be stigmatized internationally for like Chernobyl and for a specific type of disaster, while there's a whole country with a whole other benefits, services, people there, you know. It may sound unfair, and some people might try to hide it up, you know. And I personally come from Colombia, so we also have a reputation that's not necessarily associated with the good things we have in our country. So I know the feeling. I know there's a feeling of shame. I know we don't like to be stigmatized, you know, but if we embrace it directly, not try to minimize it or hide it, we can shift the narrative into something more positive, which is what, at least in our country, some people are trying to do. And slowly I see a change, although I would like it to be faster. It's still happening, and we are rebranding ourselves from these international drug lords, you know, to a country with great biodiversity and with great opportunities, you know. So this is a similar opportunity you have here in Ukraine, no? To rebrand the disaster as a way of showing how can you move forward.
So yeah, with the group, again, it's not just the three of us. It was a collective, and people also stepped in and out during the week. We had a chance to converse with people in that, and start to share some ideas from diverse groups of people joined in the conversation in terms of sharing. But through that, you know, we wanted to pick up on these narratives and these, also the personal stories. I mean, a lot of the people in the group or people who joined had family members or a friend or something. So to kind of gather that sort of information and start to think about how we can take this collective knowledge that we have and start to share ideas and start to think about moving forward. But starting broad and then starting to narrow, let's think about what is important, what is of value collectively as a group. And then we started to narrow more and more. And so almost at first we started with this idea of scenarios. We started very broad with scenarios, and I would say, to be honest, more general, let's say almost urban planning sort of scenarios. What if you wanted to bring development? What if you wanted to make it about tourism? And so as a way to just start discussing different ways of thinking of the interest groups that are interested in the site and how to think about those and deal with these forces that are pushing on the site and how to channel them into something else. And as a first pass, just I think almost as a test for ourselves, we developed 3 scenarios just so we could kind of put them forward and then look at them ourselves and think, is this the right sort of way forward? And one that came was this RAD Valley, as it's called here, meaning Radiation Valley, which may sound absurd, but I mean, Chernobyl obviously was a place of great pride to be a part of. Some of the greatest scientists of the day were there. It was a lovely place to live, and that sort of notion of being a center of intelligence and innovation, particularly within science, was the reality until the unfortunate event. And so we thought, what if we took that historical narrative and through this idea of comeback, we thought about relating to something like Silicon Valley. Which again may sound silly, but as someone who's really lived in Silicon Valley, or lived in San Francisco, you should know in some ways there's the city of San Francisco that's very known, and Silicon Valley is this stretched out sort of piece of landscape that stretches between away from San Francisco. And in some ways you could imagine maybe if Chernobyl starts to represent something else as a hub of something, could it relate to this great city of Kiev and this sort of valley that stretches in between? There's a similar landscape reality. Maybe we're thinking a bit further, but the potential of business in that coming back and science and research is something we thought could be the case. And so, yeah, we all know what Silicon Valley is. But also this notion of potentially a green utopia. Because Do you want to talk about the kind of, the reality of it?
I'm the landscape architect. Whenever there's the word green, I get No. Let's say all these three narratives are consciously about how can we bend that narrative of Chernobyl. And a sort of second take, the first was like, okay, the red line is science throughout. First, let's say, developing nuclear technology, then finding out how to fix our problems, to sort of exporting that to the rest of the world. Second would be about basically our, let's say, colonizing the planet and how we live in this world from, let's say, a very modernistic, optimistic and overconfident approach to finding out we created a disaster to reinventing a more balanced way of living, and that might be, let's say, zero footprint, zero carbon, etc. And maybe this could be the testing ground for that. Like, if this is the example of how things can go wrong in a modern society, then this might also become the spot where we actually explore how we can create this sort of new urban form.
But I would also say, I mean, you mentioned it doesn't have to become a testing ground, it already is. Like you mentioned before, the ecological reality that because humans have been removed, kind of the animals have been able to find this as their own utopia. And you were mentioning before that you were reading articles about because the humans abandoned Pripyat and other places so immediately, the houseplants merged and kind of breeded and intermingled with what would be more kind of wild plants, and new sort of ecologies have already emerged in this area that kind of don't exist anywhere else. So this testing ground exists. It's not new, it's actually there. And so this hybridization of nature that's starting to exist is there. But I would say that may sound ridiculous, that this becomes about nature, but then, again, to use a reference, just to point out that these aren't necessarily absurd notions, is the Ruhr Valley, which is in kind of western Germany, around Duisburg and Essen and a whole bunch of places. But I mean, this was, for the Germans, this was an embarrassing industrial disaster that they caused themselves, and didn't know much what to do with. And then over a series of time, through a series of events, which we'll talk about later, this has become actually one of the most well-known public parks in the world. This is an icon because of this contrast of this failed industrial heritage in contrast with new, fresh nature. Starts to make the nature seem even more provocative with this contrast around it, this life and death next to each other. And again, I would emphasize, like I said, it's in this large valley with a series of maybe smaller towns and that along the way. It's not just a park, it's not just a space, but there were a few iconic projects that got the region moving, and now that region has really turned itself around from an area that had been completely industrial and basically become failed, have started to come down with new industries in the area. And then, this is, from this image, if you want to talk about this image, Pedro, you go ahead. But one thing we wanted to talk about, my gray zone, maybe it's actually perfect that I switched to China. This notion of the exclusion zone, which we related to Luxembourg or things like that, the potential of if you have a special region or a special zone within your country or in the world, a boundary can be something of potential. So far it's been about keeping people out to make sure it's safe, but where I live on the left, which is Hong Kong. Yes, the green thing is Hong Kong. And on the right is Shenzhen, which is known, if you're into cities like I am, is they created a special economic zone just 40 years ago. So Shenzhen, all those skyscrapers, everything, that's younger than me. That all happened. Before, Shenzhen used to look like the thing on the left. Because on the right, that's Shenzhen 40 years ago when I was born, and on the left, that's Shenzhen now. And so by creating a border and let's say manipulating rules, they created economic opportunity, they created development, they created a place where people started to come. We're not saying Chernobyl is the same, But the notion of using boundary and exclusion and its own ministry that it has, you can start to play a different game in terms of how you think of who occupies the space, who it's available for, and create other opportunities for other people besides maybe what happens in other spaces. And then
So,
we went,
yeah,
we went to Chernobyl.
then we went to Chernobyl. Yeah. And if I'm honest, the experience was much different from what at least we had in our heads. You know? And so you arrived there to Chernobyl, and you had these like cultural ideas in your head, like stereotypes.
Like the stalker image, eh?
Yeah. You're prepared to be challenged. You're prepared to be scared, and you're received by this logo. And you even go there, and I don't know if you hear the music, but there's this music there. Everybody's buying. There's a line of tourists. There's a lot of memorabilia. And there are the maps. You're here. You can go here. You know. At the end of the day, it's much more touristic than you would ever think. And to the point where you have all of these things which I don't know if they really benefit the narrative or the history of the site.
Glow in the dark mugs.
Yeah. Or this map. This map, I think, it, like really shows what we're talking about, you know? Because when I saw this map, it reminded me when I was 10 years old. And I put this there, you know? Because this is the map of Israel. And it's impressive that you have a site which has this history, which has these lessons to be learned and to be kept, yeah? Like banalized in such a way that it becomes a theme park, you know? And if we want to extend the situation, like, because the site has recuperated in a certain way, it's not perfect, but it's safer in a lot of areas, then people are trying to, let's say, keep the memory of the danger alive, you know, and that's also not beneficial for the site. And you'll find fake signs that so that you create photo moments, even though there, if you measure the radiation, it's already safe enough.
Because, for example, to give a number which was shared by one of our group members who will speak later, I mean, in reality, Julian experienced more radiation by flying here from Bogota than he did by being on site for 10 hours. So the notion of the radiation experience, and there are certain parts that are dangerous. We're not eliminating the fact that there are still serious realities, but the majority of the site is actually, it's safer than when I get on a plane and go back to China tomorrow. I'm much more exposed than if I spent the day there. I mean, so this, again, this mythology of it is something that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, and this mythology is being trying to use to generate a local economy, and I think it's being forced, you know. So we are told lies, and there's this idea of danger, the Chernobyl, as we call them. They dress up in military uniforms, you know, try to make it dangerous. Or this, when we really understood it was a little bit too much, you know. This Fidel dress, lookalike, you know. I don't know if you want to associate it with communism, but this is it becomes a little bit silly, to say the least. And obviously you're going around the site with this Geiger meter measuring and learning. So this can be used as a tool for learning, but I think it can also be banalized a lot, you know, as a way to try to portray the danger that's there or that was there. You know, it's so much so that even the ecology, even the fauna, have learned to benefit from this tourism. So we were taken to feed the fish, you know. So one of the stops on the day was to feed these catfish on the river, you know, with bread. we were given bread, and I remember when I was little, I went to SeaWorld to feed the fish, you know, and it becomes a little bit ridiculous. It's funny in a way, but personally I felt a little bit insulted, if I'm honest, because it is this, and to the point that the fox even knows that this is already a touristic place, so the fox is no longer scared of humans, and he reaches people to ask for food, you know, and obviously the whole pack of dogs you'll find everywhere are already accustomed and adapted to the tourism that goes around the site.
So this was obviously a moment in time, but we really had the feeling that it was almost this moment where tourism is a bit growing out of control. And what we heard is that actually 2017 compared to 2018, that in that time the touristic numbers tripled from 50,000 to 150,000. If that's in 1 year, what will happen if we're talking about future scenarios? What will happen in 10 years or 20 years? And we strongly felt that somehow the value of the site, with all, let's say, everything that you can find today, these expectations of this ruined world, and really a feeling and a bit of the history of that place is something that will decline rapidly in the future. And so we start to talk about maybe there's even something like, as you have with these, if you have with these radioactive materials, they have this half-life, you know, the amount of years in which the radiation is only 15%. Maybe you have the same with touristic value, sort of half-life of touristic value. And, in a way, we have to, probably this is something that we cannot avoid, and we have to come with additional strategies to keep the place value. This is our idea of how we think the quality of the site could develop towards the future. Something that we really realized after visiting the site, but also visiting the museum, is that whatever happens, the core quality will be that it's a place where one of the most important disasters, the tragedies of Western civilization took place. And this historical event, in this historical importance, will be something to preserve and to allow people to actually connect. And so what we think is that sort of this direct experience of experiencing, radiation with the Geiger teller, or walking through abandoned buildings, seeing the old energy plants, that will slowly decline. The buildings will crumble, all the energy plants will be dismantled and taken out. It will slowly lose that quality. At the same time, we know that actually the natural value over time is actually increasing, so it becomes more and more interesting and valuable as a nature area. And we think that the best approach to the site would be to embrace the fact that there is a level of control over here, and use that control to only allow for certain sequence of positive events and projects to take place on this site that help to build up this new quality of the area, and that's what we have been working on as a group. And we think that it's bending, let's say, the main identity from this, let's say, this nuclear experience, or almost like a nuclear theme park, nuclear Disneyland, towards a sort of very interesting blend of three things. First of all, nature reserve. Second of all, a place of industrial heritage. And third of all, a place as a memorial, a place where we can connect to this important history. And we think that's a very interesting thing. It is a merge between three different typologies. All these typologies we know, and at the Chernobyl exclusion zone, they come together to form a unique blend, you could say. And the form in which this could take place could be an idea of an international building exhibition. This is a sort of a formula that has been done already quite some time. And Jason was showing the Ruhr area. This is a development that started as an international building exhibition. Basically, the formula is this: you take a long stretch, like 10 years. Over the course of 10 years, you're curating an area in order to sort of stimulate positive growth, and you do that through organizing a sequence of events, of touristic things, of cultural things, and by building new architecture, building new landscape. And in the hope that after those 10 years, let's say, the area takes care of itself and starts to thrive. Do you want to talk a bit more about...
No, I would just say, I mean, the key is that this notion of control now is all about controlling safety and disaster. But the notion of control going forward, exactly like you're saying, is controlling this historical or touristic interest or landscape. And so, related to the landscape that things have started to emerge, there needs to be a bit of control or orchestration to allow what sort of cultural or living or working things start to emerge on this fertile soil. So this notion of control bends, I like your using of the word bend, to other issues, not just making sure no one gets hurt, but it starts to become, how do we evolve this area? How do we allow things to grow and emerge that benefit maybe some of the people who lived here previously, maybe some people who are interested in coming here for other reasons, whether it's business or otherwise, but this notion of control shifts to a different attitude of not exclusion, but inclusion.
And it also has to do with the natural reserve. This is a picture of Chiribiquete in Colombia. It's a national park that we have there. And I relate it to the situation in Chernobyl because we already have an area that has specific boundaries. You know? And although these boundaries, we at some point even discussed if they should change because the radiation has shifted. So and the boundaries were a result of the analysis of the radiation. We then understood that that shouldn't be the case because these boundaries allow for a certain level of control, you know. And the relation with natural parks has two main areas. One is to setting up the boundary and some rules within that area, some special rules. So when you go into a natural reserve, you are in a different area than in the city, and there are a different set of rules on how to behave, on what to do, what you can do, what you can't. It protects the environment and lets it thrive, but there's also an opportunity to engage with the community, and we understood that this tragedy had a lot of refugees. Refugees normally are something associated with moving from country to country because of wars, you know, mainly, but as also a Colombian that has a lot of internal refugees, we understand the complexity of the situation. And a lot of people moved out, and a lot of people would be interested in coming back, you know, because they have their lives there, because they understand what happened after we signed, the Colombian government signed the peace treaty, was that a lot of families went back to their small towns. And the opportunity here and the relationship with these natural park, is that local communities become stewards of the site. How do you maintain the site? How do you maintain the memory of this place? Well, through the people that go back and through the new generations of people that benefit from living in a natural reserve. And there's also the memorial. Like it's a place, it's an opportunity to generate a place that maintains the memory of what happened, that doesn't allow people to forget the tragedy that occurred.
And now for the most awkward slide switch of the presentation. From Memorial to Burning Man. Which may sound absurd, but it emerged from the group, and at first I thought it was insane, as someone who's been to Burning Man, to be honest. But there was something really beautiful about the idea of, because of this, these narratives and these false ideas. I mean, the whole idea of Burning Man is there's this kind of false god that you kind of, in a drug-induced reality, kind of worship all week, and then in the end you burn him. And so there's this mythology that exists in that space that creates a magic and something special. But you also inhabit a piece of landscape that no human being should live in for a long period of time. And so in that regard, there was something beautiful about Burning Man as a representation of this notion of a way to get maybe people to engaged in the site. It's not about drugs and all the lovely things that happen at Burning Man, but it is about the idea of how could we maybe draw people to come to the site, to understand that it is a safe place to be. But also another beautiful reality of contemporary Burning Man is there's a high importance on respect for nature. So you come there, you do your things, you do your installations, you have your fun, but you take everything with you. And the organization is militant about this, and it's a point of pride of the event that they come to this very special landscape, and when they leave, there was no trace that they were there other than some car paths and bike paths. So that was a representation. And it's also not just a party, like you see on Burning Man, this starts to become a place where people start to want to do innovative ideas and really explore things. This isn't just a party anymore and just a great event. This is art, this is culture, this is a place to be, this is something to celebrate, this sort of wild reality. But this isn't just an American sort of phenomenon, this sort of idea of event space. I mean, CANactions is still, to be honest, super legendary for me. I've not been to that, but is another example that's a bit more regional of how these events can get together and bring people into a space for a shared moment. But then also, again, shifting maybe away from parties and dancing, which is lovely, but also just to a notion of an art-based event and culture that takes maybe a landscape, in this case a very beautiful landscape, that starts to bring installations. And for a short period of time, this landscape takes on a very different tradition here in Russia. But also even getting a bit more local, and I mention this because I was a part of it. My partner was a curator of the Bulgaria in Plovdiv, has a one architecture week, and Peter was a part of it as well because we were able to invite him to the event. But for it, our goal was actually in Plovdiv. It's along a beautiful river, but because of their Soviet reality, they kind of turned their backs on the river. So our event was about bringing people back to the river and understanding nature and appreciating it in a city that was overlooked. So these sorts of events, this is not just something that happens in California or wherever. These things are already happening very much in the region, and very much in the region. I mean, the Film Festival 86 is already taking the identity of Chernobyl and of Duga and making it a part of their festival. So there's already a local community that's interested in the arts and what this culture means moving forward and how it's inspiring and can bring about new ideas. And we think that's a way to get things started. We're going to talk next more about, let's say, more planning and policy and these sort of things, and then maybe design interventions, but just simple events that can really start with really, really simple events to start to celebrate and get people engaging with the site.
With the group, we've been thinking of how to, let's say, in concrete steps, develop the region of Chernobyl in a positive way, based on what we just shown. And basically, we could say there's two things that need to happen. On the one hand, we need to very precisely define this framework for development. sort of define the conditions in which future projects and events could take place. These were the things that we thought were the most relevant there. First of all, we said it before, we need to keep the border as a historical definition of the site. We're at this moment where the government is thinking of actually shrinking that border, allow bigger parts to be open for any development. But we think it's good to keep the border where it is. And within that border, mainly follow the model of a nature reserve and use also, let's say, the limitations of a nature reserve and also the exceptions to those limitations as a way to control development. And then a very important next step is we need to get up to date with the knowledge of the site, because we heard that from many persons that it's actually awkward that there's so little up-to-date information that tells us about radiation, that tells us about biodiversity, and that tells us about the quality of the cultural heritage. Here we like this is in the Museum of Chernobyl, and this sort of hand-drawn map of this original border of the site. How we understood it is that it's original, just drawn by an army general, and so you could definitely question, let's say, the justification of exactly that line. But because of its limitations, it has become a beautiful nature area. As you can see here, these are just some slides, photos that we took when visiting the site. But it's definitely, it can be a very attractive and special natural reserve. Then I think we shift to inviting people from the group to explain more about first this framework, and then about the different projects that we propose on the site. Yes.
My name is Dennis Ratif. I'm from Green Clinic Life Science. Life Science, we are a research organization here in Kiev in Estonia, and we're working with biodiversity at all for a long time, maybe from 2002. And the main idea that the point where we are coming from negative position, from something scary to positive reality, is in awareness. So when we completely know where is the danger and where is the danger is absent, so we can change the situation. So main thing that Chernobyl is has completely analog from IT position history. So it is very old-fashioned still. And if we use digital achievements of modernity to change the situation, we will get more better experience from that. So we need to make Chernobyl digital at first. So this territory should be scanned with drones, with some land measurements additional when we are not sure, and the digital GIS map should be created for the next use in mobile app. So personal mobile app, completely free, with like QR code at the gates, should be created. And as I got also ideas that this app, but it's not my topic, could be used for any further needs. So it should be created.
One
Next one.
I think you pushed the X there.
Yes. And then, to realize this, everything's okay. So we need to inventorize everything we have there and to put it on this JS map. So, next.
Yeah. That's you have one more slide later on.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Okay, everything okay.
And let's say we expect this to be, let's say, the minimal framework to develop before we can start to do projects and develop events on the site. And we listed sort of potential projects that we think are interesting. And I'll skip this and directly give the word to the first guy.
But the one thing I would say, while you go ahead and maybe tell everyone how to use the flipper, what's important about this to realize is, like we said, we think the opportunity of this zone is for people of the region, or maybe even international people, to explore ideas and projects here. So the notion of all of us as participants kind of coming up with different ideas so that we could explore them and illustrate them is exactly getting at what we're thinking, is how do we allow people who have ideas of ways of improving the area or taking advantage of the area or giving back to the area, how do we allow these sort of dreams and ideas to start to be expressed by a different group of people, a diverse group of people. But then I'll let you just take the lead.
My name is Vadim and I'm a nuclear physician, and I want to tell you a few minutes about my idea of the using of UAVs and these technologies in Chernobyl exclusion zone. Firstly, just a brief introduction, I can tell you that in the Chernobyl zone, currently I think one of the biggest problems is the lack of information. Probably the most of the information is all about the nuclear reactor number 4 that where explosion appeared. But outside of this reactor, I mean for the whole exclusion zone, last time when it was when really good analysis was done, it was done just after the accident in the late 80s. So on this slide, this is like the overall picture of this approach in the Chernobyl, just because the Chernobyl zone is kind of specific place. It's all about the radiation. So firstly, with GIS you can define all the required information, but also plus the radiation dose rates, radiation contamination, and other stuff, which can make some kind of huge cake. There's a lot of information, and you can do with this info whenever you want on your PC and stuff. And I think that's quite so. And I want to propose like kind of course, everybody gonna ask about the equipment, how we can do this, because the zone is so huge. So currently, just we already know a lot of industrial drones that produced by such companies such as DJI and so on. And you can also there are a lot of companies in the world that produces really small dosimeters or spectrometers or like other equipment for the radiation measurements. And just to combine this stuff, you can make possible to make a precise modern map with all required information, just because in modern dosimeters and modern drones they already have onboard PCs and require software to analyze all the data. Also, the another kind of project is about like not flying drones but ground rovers. It's gonna be even cheaper just because the flying drones currently are a little bit more expensive than these ones. But with the rover onboard PC and other spectrometer or dosimeter equipment, we can do exactly the same as the one-man, because previously all the researches was made just by the humans. I mean, so with the rover, it's gonna be much faster to define all the information. better. And the last target kind of all that purpose is just to make the very well updated information, because as I told you before, I think without updated data, it's impossible to move forward on it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so what I was trying to do, I was trying to understand how safe it is actually in Chernobyl area. So if we can arrange some open camping spots there, if we can arrange events there, if we can get rid of like all the bureaucratic procedure of arranging attendance there. So I started with analyzing the pollution levels. So with the light red color, you see the area that was mostly polluted in 1992. But currently, only a small zone around the nuclear reactor and Pripyat is unsafe. And by the 2050, the levels of cesium-137 are going to be so low that even the zone will only be like not okay for living, but will be okay for like exploring and even camping. The interesting thing is that like in different countries the law the law of nuclear regulations are different. So, for example, the territory unsafe for living, according to Ukrainian law, is like quite bigger than if we compare it to if it was, for example, in France. But the thing is that unlike cesium, the pollution with transuranium elements will stay there much longer, and we won't be able to grow any food on the territory of the Chernobyl region. But the good thing is that the polluted soil is already like 1 meter deep, so it's safe to explore the area. And based on this information, we tried to refine the zoning and created this map. So you can see that kind of got a bit strange. Okay. So what we propose is like to get rid of the like this tourist, not to get rid, but to allow people to explore the areas themselves without police or without tourist guides that will show them just like some special spots. And this way there is like a small territory that is absolutely like forbidden to enter. A bit bigger light red area where you can like explore the area, but you can camp. And actually like the huge area that is currently like not free to go in, that can be open for events, for festivals, and even for living. So we can simply create an app and complement it with like field markings to make people know if they're crossing some dangerous borders, so everybody will be safe. And the thing is that the borders of the zones are kind of complicated, and there are a lot of like small dangerous spots and small safe spots in dangerous areas. So just like an idea, okay, where's the idea? Just as the idea, we can arrange some
secret idea.
Yeah, we can arrange some small camping spots in these places. Unfortunately, I can't show it to you because
maybe it comes later.
Maybe an accident. Or a comedy.
not really allowed because there is like steps on the tours that everyone has to take. But at the same time, there is a big potential, like many spots and like biodiversity, and people are curious about history. Many people, like stalkers, want to stay overnight. So basically, it's the moment like when arising a lot of illegal tourism, which becoming kind of huge, how we understood, like from tour guide and all information we found. So I was reconsidering how can we change this tourism idea. And I was thinking about diversification. So basically changing all concepts. One of them would be like of the tool. So controlled location. So basically just slightly changing idea what is now. When we have passing going from point to a point, to change it, like we have like main locations, like power plant, Pripyat, Duga, and we basically can circulate between all of them. And as was said before, we have like all the safe camping facilities, and actually like all that can be accessed through map. So basically we can find destination, historical, audio, overview, so we don't need any more like tour guides. We come up with the idea to add virtual reality, so you can actually see how it was before when you're in some important spots. Diversity of movement would be one of the tools also to be there, because now exists a lot of scientists who are curious about biodiversity, and they're trying to go there legally to make their exploration, to see this kind of animals which are staying there and disappeared in other parts of Ukraine. And we have, as I said before, we have stalkers trying to stay overnight. And as coincidence, like having like this new concept, like this application, we can be less invasive because everything is online, so it's no need to put science like in museums. So basically, it's how it could look like maps, so you have like really clear spots. So if you need to see like where area you stay, if it's radioactive, you have like this map. If you need to see where's the next transportation point you can take it. This example of how virtual reality could be, like in simple ways. You staying there, you seeing how it was before explosion. And also thinking about movement of people, so giving them some eye watches which just start alarm when you go into radioactive zone would be kind of creating more safe environment for scientists and stalkers. And this is basically illustration of new kind of marshrutka in this area. So basically you can circulate from point to point. You see in a map, like Google, you see like point on the map in Google, okay, here's like where I want to go, and the way is there and there, so I can go either this way, either this way. So, I think that's it.
Next one. Who's next?
Hello everyone, this is Alexandra. I'm an architect, and I'm interested in like ecosystems and also like interaction this with architecture. What I was trying to do when I was part of this workshop is looking at the city as kind of inspiration, because for me it's an extremely beautiful place where you see like how nature invades architecture. Well, and I see some kind of qualities there we can learn from. So part of this, I was looking at the ecosystem. So in that year, this kind of animals, they abandoned the city, the zone, because they living was connected with a human, and as the humans abandoned this place, these animals abandoned too. These animals replaced them. one of animal like repeating, but it's like black swan, so it's not the same. And I was looking at the place where they live. So you know the Pripyat zone is like abandoned, and smaller things live there because they have enough grass to feed them. And bigger animals, they live in abandoned villages around. It was like unmanned before. Then I was looking at the Pripyat itself. So things between like architecture and a landscape, how do they interact, and like defining this border. Initial idea was kind of mapping different typologies. For example, like entrances. You would never imagine architects would put like in the middle of the entrance big tree, but it happens in Chernobyl. It's beautiful. Yeah, and you would never imagine someone putting like trees on the balconies or on the playground or like a stadium. It's extremely beautiful typology where you have usually like abandoned field, but on this, I'm afraid of here you don't even see like triggers. So I was trying to make it more clear on these things, and hence it was a color, and we presented it graphically like this. So that's it.
Okay, so now it's part about like people who live there, about their destiny, and what we think they should do next. Like I don't know if anybody knows, but it was a lot of people who lived there, and they must leave because of the danger. So it's like different information. Some you can find about like 240,000 or even 500,000. So it's different. And like average year of the migrants now is like 56 years. And currently in zone live 270 years. Yeah. And it's interesting because like those people who now live there, it's old people. It's usually like grandmas, like Bausha, and they come back because they can't find themselves in other world. Like they want to be there because it's there, like they live their whole their life, and we can.
На Чернобыльской атомной электростанции произошла авария. Поврежден один из атомных реакторов.
160,000 people evacuated from here. They had to leave for good, and there was like no choice.
Ой, играй, гармонист, играй, голубленочок, ты накидаю хажорки, як меня миллионочок.
Тільки йшли так, будто би як партизани. Підкопувалися під проволоку і тоді йшли додому.
Це всі помирали, да?
Дуже мало людей, мало.
А хоч якийсь дід є тут?
А, бо там такі два, що не плод.
Вот бабушкин город. Вот это все мое. Все мое.
So this is a part of the film. It's like a trailer of the film that calls Babushkis of Chernobyl, and this film is about like how grandmas live there, like about their usual life, and why I was interested in this topic, like because my grandma was born in the exclusion zone, and she left her home because of the tragedy. And the interesting thing that like now all the people who live there, they live there illegally because you cannot live there like by our government. They don't allow you, but they're like all those grandmas, they can't live without government because government gives themselves like food
or medicine or something like it's not an autonomous living. And the interesting thing is that in the in this the main document, I think you have this right of return, and it in Ukrainian we don't have this point right of return, but in the national one you have it, and in Palestine or other conflicts, this is basically you can return whatever you were born, no matter what, only if you don't be dangerous there. And this house looks, this is village of my grandma, so it looks it now. And why I think the people should return there, because this happens not only because of the nobody lives there, nobody maintains the buildings, but also because of the illegal business there, export of the metal, of the forest, of the everything, I don't know word in English, but it's basically marодеры, которые все забрали. And you can, you can find for example, my father, he was there and he saw that somebody destroyed the wall, so bring something from the house. And I think now we know that a lot of maybe not legal, maybe illegal stuff happens in the zone, and the government of the zone don't want the people live there. But this is an opportunity to make it more clear, more visible. It's like ice in the zone. You will not have so much freedom to make illegal stuff. And I was interviewing my grandma and my father, and it's interesting because I get two different answers. I mainly asked them if you want to come back. My grandma, it was a long conversation with my grandma, and the main point was she would like to, but now she don't want to because of the negative which she had after this tragedy, because she need to left. A lot of her family was in bad condition after that, and a lot of people was against the people who lived, who come from Chernobyl. But my father, he was there only in his young life. When the tragedy happens, he was 16, and he remembers only good about this place. And I asked him, did you want to come back? He said, I'm thinking about to come to see what is happening, because now it's really hard to go to the zone because of the cold. And then we was have this discussion further, and he said that maybe if everything will be good, he even buy a land there to live, because if it's no danger, if it's not a lot of radiation and etc. Because the nature is really good, what he said. And this one, this is the Ukrainian super futuristic house, but it's actually true. It's called passive dom. You can buy the one of the models, the small apartment for $64,000, and it is 3D printed. It's totally autonomous, and I think they even can make something about a little bit more radiation. So, but I'm not sure. It's also zone is a good point to test ground for autonomous living, and it's already real. If you want to, you can buy a house and go there. Not maybe for a proper living, but in dacha style, but it can be true. Yeah. So.
Я буду говорить по-русски. На сегодня вообще очень актуальна тема альтернативных источников энергии, поскольку это позволяет нашей экологии быть немного чище,
И также, поскольку после взрыва у нас образовалась очень большая территория, и вот на этой карте можно посмотреть, что сколько леса и сколько степи в 30-километровой зоне. И если рассматривать 10-километровую зону, она более такая красная выделена, можно посмотреть также красным выделен степь. И мы можем использовать эту территорию для установки альтернативных источников энергии, таких как солнечных батарей, либо же ветрогенераторов. Поскольку ветрогенераторы — это такие большие очень установки, и они требуют один где-то, если это брать колесо, где-то 60 метров, и используют очень большие децибелы, то вот зона отчуждения очень хорошо для этого очень хорошо там используется. Но для более точного дослідження нужно еще смотреть на карту Петрова и просматривать, где это лучше устанавливать. Также и устанавливать такие вот ветровые фермы для обеспечения для воссоздания ветровых ферм. Также солнечные батареи, солнечные фермы для производства энергии солнечной и солнца. Здесь вообще как бы очень хорошая ситуация, уже даже одна создана там, и тоже можно делать больше. Это более затратный метод, и также для этого нужно смотреть по ориентации и по уклону солнечных батарей. Также на этой территории у нас есть ресурсы вода, реки, и можно использовать установки и связанные с водой, и черпать энергию также с воды, и делать накопительные установки для распространения энергетики по территории Украины.
The inspiration for our project actually came from this whole experience of the workshop. Like, we came with an idea that radiation is the key thing in Chernobyl. And radiation is something you cannot hear, you cannot see, you cannot smell, and it forces people out. So it's a bit like a ghost, in a way. And we came in with the idea, with the approach of looking for that ghost, how can we live with it, how can we use it. But what turned this whole narrative around was actually the visit. As you've heard already, the visit wasn't what we expected it to be. It was less about radiation and more about the zone itself. Basically, in these 32 years, the ghost of radiation has decayed. And what we saw is the really present, really sensible spirit of the Soviet time, carefully preserved in this zone that wasn't really touched by humans. And we think it's very relevant.
So why this Soviet spirit is now important? Because for new generations, it is difficult to understand Soviet reality. They could understand only with the stories of their parents
asset for science to also strive in. However, we also understand that there is a huge educational capacity that has to be used, because we see Chernobyl as a can, so it's like conserva, where the Soviet Union has been conserved, and we can use this space, this unaltered architecture, and the mentality that is in the air to kind of explain the narrative and to explain the foreigners as well as our Ukrainians and people from the new generations to feel the spirit of the Soviet realities and to create a more or less objective idea of how this regime functioned back then. So the way we want to do it is basically, so the problem is that as been explained already, is that there is a lot of subjective ideas going on around, and that can create also horrible populistic consequences. And using the space that we have in Chernobyl right now, we can kind of interact with the history from the past, and that's the way we want to do it. So basically we see it as an open space museum. So it's not about having just one building where you learn about the history, but it's about going to various places and kind of touching this history and interacting it. So for example, this is Pripyat, and we have visited a couple of sites, such as, for example, the school. So the schools could have, as you can see this on the left, we have the situation that is currently going on, and on the right is what used to be there. So our idea is to use this kind of locations and to renovate half, for example, if it's a classroom, then if we renovate half of the classroom, then people can understand how, first of all, it looked like, but second of all, we can educate them about the Soviet educational system, about like pioneers, about the propaganda used at school, about the Soviet science. So you can kind of touch the objects and learn about the philosophy and the concept and the regime. The same goes about the sports. So we all understand that there was a huge philosophy in the Soviet Union when it comes to sports and physical activity, and being like an athletic nation that is going to show the rest of the world how strong they are. So again, we have, for example, a swimming pool which can be renovated as well. So half of it being renovated, where you can again listen to the story of why the physical activity was so important. The same goes to the stadium, which we have visited, and was quite shocking to see a huge forest in the middle of the stadium. And I think that's kind of like this mesmerizing experience that can be used for education as well. Apartment blocks, so first of all, there is absolutely no character in the apartment blocks, and there is the personality and decorations are quite lost. So having, for example, one apartment renovated, and as a visitor you can go around this apartment and learn about the everyday life of these people, about the things, you know, like what did they cook, for example, in the kitchen, and what kind of evenings they were spending with their families. And one of the last things is like supermarket, for example, which was not a very, which was quite a rare thing in the Soviet Union, and we could also talk about the economic system, about deficit and lines, and again, like people can walk around, touch things, and listen to like audio guides and so on. And the public spaces, so in terms of why the streets were so wide and what was the philosophy behind the infrastructure of the Soviet regimes. Of course, there will be like a visit to the nuclear station to also understand what are the consequences of the authoritarian regimes and how can this totalitarian rule influence not only education, energetic and social life, but also what kind of future consequences it can have on the people. And of course, coming back to the Duga, talking about the secrets of this regime and about the kind of background of the Cold War and different security problems that the Soviet Union was experiencing. That's pretty much it. So yeah, our concept was just, you know, going to different sites, renovating some parts so people can interact with the past and to make up their own objective mind on the way the past looked like. that's all for now. And also, like, we found the slide that was missing, so maybe I feel like very fast.
There are more slides. There are more slides.
Okay, never mind.
But there's still there's.
But maybe in the very end I can show it. So
Yeah.
because it's too bad.
Because you have still one slide here.
There's more presentation.
Yes.
And one of the ideas, Chernobyl zone has very rich biodiversity, and as I know, and as specialists describe in their works, now we have a lot of rare species restored. So we have restored populations of species are absent or very rare on the rest territory of Europe. So we can use these samples, test them genetically, take these samples to some very big nursery, and it's about all kinds of organisms, and share them back to the former natural areas. So it could be like pan-European project, like Great Nursery, with international scientists, experts, and with some facilities built inside. So, thank you.
And then to conclude, we have a last project that was basically handed over to us by the main character of this movie, the Russian woodpecker. We have seen it. Let's say all the participants of the workshop, we have watched it, and I don't know if the others also know this movie, but it's basically a movie about the Duga and the role it had in Cold War. And it all spins around sort of a conspiracy theory of, let's say, the construction of this and the potential role these people had in the disaster of Chernobyl. Oh, no. I don't know if I pronounce his name well. Alexandrovich has been so kind to visit the group 2 days ago to also listen to our ideas and reflect on it. But he also came with his own idea to turn this Duga into a monument for failed communism. The place is immense. It's 400 meters wide and 150 meters high. So it's if you see it, it is a monument. But now you see it and you question for what. And we think the nice thing is that he wants to give it a purpose. This could be through a number of ways. And one of them could be to make an elevator that brings you up to the top to really experience the size, the magnitude of this crazy structure. And so it could be an idea to add, let's say, a publicly accessible elevator to this area. After his visit here, we have visited him in his gallery yesterday night, and we, let's say, decided to collaborate and to work in the coming weeks on actually elaborating this idea and visualize it and see if we can start up crowdfunding campaign to actually make this idea happen in the end.
And I would say what's key about that is the reason we did this is to start a collaboration. The reality is Chernobyl is a place that inherently, because of what happened there, it's actually a space for international collaboration. So yeah, you're Dutch, I'm American, you're Colombian. The money that comes into that zone is Ukrainian, it's American, it's European, it's many things. So it's got this international perspective on it. But we're hoping to use some of that interest in this sort of space to facilitate the dreams or ideas of a place like Fedor or others. And so that's the hope of going forward, is to try and find projects like maybe some that have been presented here. But in terms of what we will go forward, because for us, I think we have to emphasize this is not just a workshop. We were able to get funding in order to facilitate this. And we look forward to taking what we've done here, and because Chernobyl is such a lack of information, such a lack of transparency, we'll share what we've experienced here and gathered, and share it online in a publication, but just an open source database. We hope to take this further academically in terms of, as we've talked about, there's lessons we think from what has happened here and that can relate to other spaces in the world in a more academic realm. But in many ways, what we'd also like it to be known is, like with Fedor and others, and maybe others in the room or whatever, we're going to take this, use this document to go for the next level of funding and continue researching and operating and trying to progress these ideas and explorations in the region and on the site. So we're looking for going forward. And this is not the end of the presentation, but this is the end of at least this moment. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for your time. If there's any questions or comments, we're happy to answer any of us about what we explored together. Thank you.